to get more. So this is one significant and potentially unexpected impact of a public health crisis. Well, there's also other parts of the food supply chain that are being affected as well. So there's been restrictions on people entering and leaving the U.S. and much of the harvesting, especially of fruits and vegetables in the U.S., is reliant on immigrant labor. And because of these travel restrictions, there have been large portions of crops that are just left in fields unharvested. So that's an impact from the production side. And then there's also been a recent impact on aspects of storage and processing. So we've also recently seen in the news that many meat processing plants are being forced to shut down because the working conditions require that people are in close contact with one another. And meat processing plants are actually reported as one of the hotspots of emerging new COVID cases in the US. So there's a lower ability to process meats and to process animal products that are being produced by farmers. So just a few points for us to think about as we move the conversation forward. These are lessons that are being learned as we go, but they're also in many ways lessons that are being relearned and things that we already knew, but we potentially were complacent in responding to. So one obvious impact is that lower income households are the ones that are being disproportionately affected in terms of food security in a number of different ways by this COVID situation. This also more broadly highlights that there are trade-offs between a system that's highly efficient, which is the case for the US food supply chain, and a system that's highly resilient. And discussing circularity, we can think about ways to potentially achieve both great efficiency and improved resilience. This also shows that there are a number of supply chains that are ill-equipped to handle synchronized shocks. So if there are disruptions that are caused at multiple steps in the food supply chain or other types of supply chains, we're seeing that they're having difficulty reacting to and responding to a crisis such as this. And what this really points to is that there's a renewed need for a systems of systems understanding where we examine all of the interconnections and complexities that potentially link one step in a supply chain to another step in a supply chain, trying to understand how to make them more robust in responding to shocks. So with that, those are my initial thoughts, and I'll pass it off to whomever is in next.
Okay, so to go next is Pauline from the UK. Pauline, can we have you?
Well, thank you very much. It's a great privilege to be taking part in this discussion. I'm sorry that I'm not in Nigeria, where I might have been right now for the it's on the circular economy, so we have a slightly different topic. Very much of interest, of course, but I'm speaking to you from a just about sunny Hull in the northeast of England. So I'll start by giving a brief update on what's happening with the circular economy in the UK, and then consider some of the lessons that we might be able to take from recent events relating to COVID-19. So the UK government has taken with some enthusiasm to the circular economy. It's part of the industrial strategy, as you see from this quote, which means that it's seen as contributing to economic development and is being implemented via an environment bill, which is currently stalled because Parliament is focusing on other things. Now, some of these policies originated with the EU, but the government's keen to emphasise that they will survive and be supplemented post-Brexit. If you look at some of the issues included in the bill, which incidentally doesn't mention the word circular economy, there are some provisions to do with product standards and labelling. It's much more to do with recovery. For example, homogenising a complicated plastic recycling scheme where it varies from place to place in the UK, and products consequently have labels that say, well, this might be recyclable, but we don't know where you live. So the government is trying to get around that knotty problem. Overall, though, you would say this is rather an incremental approach, definitely a transition rather than a transformation of how we produce and consume what might be seen as a limited response to a climate emergency. Now, my research in the circular economy focuses on social implications, so it's kind of the social aspects of COVID-19 that I am trying to capture here. So the slide in the bottom right shows the daily deaths reported in the UK since early in March that have risen up in a most alarming way. We've seen that the UK now has the largest number of deaths in Europe, though not quite the largest death rate. We'll all have seen many of these graphs, and sadly similar ones, over recent weeks. And one of the notable features of this is how scientists and experts have come to the fore, and the government are now leaning very heavily on them for advice. You know, academics are no longer that dreaded liberal metropolitan elite who are selfishly campaigning against Brexit. Suddenly they've got some uses as well. But of course, politics is inescapable. It's politicians who are interpreting and making the decisions. And we've seen fewer international comparisons since we noticed the UK climbing up the wrong type of league tables relating to COVID-19. The major response to that has been the lockdown since March 23rd. We've been staying at home. As the slogan says at the top right, they stay at home to protect the NHS. Often it says protect our NHS, the National Health Service, this beloved institution founded in 1948 to provide free healthcare at the point of delivery, which it still very largely does, but is grotesquely underfunded. And there's been quite a lot of sort of privatization behind the scenes. Nonetheless, this has worked very well as a slogan. People have stayed at home. And as we heard in the US case, the experience of that is highly variable according to what type of home you live in and who you're sharing it with. It took the media a couple of weeks, I would say, to realize that not everyone has a garden that they could escape into from time to time. There'll be different levels of connectivity via the internet, if indeed at all. So they're a very varied social experience. We have this new group, a very large group actually, of key workers that we're hearing about, and we literally applaud every Thursday evening. But these are people characterized very much by low wages and poor working conditions, especially in the care sector. That's people looking after the elderly and disabled, which have suffered a very disproportionate contribution to the number of deaths. I think something like 40% of the deaths in the UK have been in care homes as opposed to hospitals. There's also been a disproportionate impact on ethnic minorities. So the NHS is partly an explanation for that. 40% of the workforce of the NHS come from ethnic minorities. Partly as a consequence of that and other issues that will be resolved, I think, later on, as suffering a disproportionate death rate from the virus. As in the US too, there's been enormous economic impact. Over 7 million workers are now being financially supported by the government through their furlough scheme, costing billions of dollars per month. Now, naturally, that's not sustainable. There are debates now about how quickly we can wean people off this investment, which is kind of going from being seen as keeping everyone going in a crisis to people relaxing perhaps and enjoying too much being paid to stay at home. So you can see the sort of tone coming through from different portions of politicians and the media. Well, what will happen next? Already we've seen some divergence in the UK, Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales keeping a stricter lockdown than England now, which causes some boundary issues, very highly populated boundary between England and Wales. What happens if you work in one country and live in the other? Are you allowed to travel there? It's a bit uncertain at the moment. And a divergence of opinion as to whether we should take this as a breaking point and completely reinvent how we live and work, or do we need to get back to normal as quickly and sort of turn back on the economy that has generated the prosperity that at least some people enjoy? So what can we conclude from this? Do we want a transition or a transformation? Well, we need a transformation, but maybe we need to think about where we're trying to get to before we rush into it. Obviously, in the COVID situation, we've had no choice but to rush, but I think the circular economy, we may want to pause and think and work things out a bit better to try to take into account the many sort of social divisions that we have, thinking about which jobs might appear and disappear, how that will impact differently on different sections of the community. We must never forget geography. I've talked about the variations within the UK, but in this sort of global crisis, what we've seen is countries to a certain extent pulling up the drawbridges, but of course they are deeply interrelated with each other. Science is playing an extraordinarily important role in this particular situation, of course, but maybe is better at, well, providing numbers and providing questions, but not answers. Those are political decisions, and I would just like to close by saying that we have to remember the impacts on different people. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Let's quickly take the last person for this first round. Walter from the Netherlands, please.
Share my screen. One moment, please. Are you seeing it now?
Sure.
Yes, okay. Good, my name is Walter Vermeulen. I'm from Utrecht University in the Netherlands, and I'll shortly introduce myself and say some words about what is happening in the Netherlands and around, and then I want to spend most of my time on reflecting on the short-term and the long-term impacts, and some discourse starting up at the moment. I can show some comparable graphs like were shown in the earlier presentations about the Dutch situation as well. So we closed down mid-March, and the slide here also shows the number of casualties in the Netherlands. The blue mountain there on the left is the official death rate, but this has to be taken with some precaution, because this is only the registered people that died with corona, but we know in reality that's up to now some 5,500. But we know that in this, people dying in nursery houses are not included in the counts, and that's why the other graph to the right is shown, because this is the actual over starvation measured by the Statistics Bureau. And you can see that the COVID peak is higher than the flu peak in 2 years ago, which is also found in European statistics for the whole of Europe. You see every winter there's some flu peak, but to the right you see the current European figure. Well, this was the building I was talking about, which I didn't see for some time. The blue one is just comparable to the other graphs we saw. The numbers are really getting low at the moment, gladly. And this European statistics is what is, I'm trying to make it a bit bigger for you. So this is the higher number, which is caused by the flu in 2 years ago. And this is what we see here now. With the COVID issue crisis, and these are the European figures for the whole of Europe. So this flu statistics is visible, and this is what we are witnessing at the moment. I always look at these international statistics, and I'm always interested to see the number of casualties per 1 million people. Actually, you see that Belgium is hit the hardest. Even going beyond Spain and Italy, the UK is moving up as well. The US is still here, but of course the geography is much larger. I added some statistics from the Europeans or the US states as well there. But looking at this, maybe as a scientist, it's interesting to see how this is used in policy making as well, because comparing worldwide these statistics, we have to take them for what they are worth. I showed already the difference in the Netherlands with the official corona statistics and the overall statistics. But for a large part of the world, I'm not sure how reliable the information is that we are getting also in these overviews. Just I copied 2 news items, one about Tanzania, where reporters saying anything about corona are chased by the police and put in jail. And in Ecuador, we we hear stories about huge breakouts, which are not so very visible in these global statistics at the moment. So I'm not sure everything we say about the corona crisis, if this is what it will be in the end, indeed, if more knowledge will come later. Well, what do we see here in the Netherlands? It's mainly more or less the same story as the UK and in the US. Overloaded hospital systems, increased death rates, the travel infrastructure is completely closed down. Only 10% of the earlier use of, for example, the railways was the case. It's going up a little bit more now. Within Europe, we see, of course, the different regimes for lockdown. Some are more stringent and others are more flexible. But everywhere we are now working remotely behind our desks at home, assuming that we have that, of course. Groups and crowd meetings are banned, probably for a very long time. The bigger events will probably not happen in the Netherlands, at least for the rest of the year. Then what you see in all these statistics is this domino effect. Yeah? We don't know which country is still getting what kind of peak in the statistics. And to some extent, one of the things we also see is in the international market, that it's any market related to the corona, we see a war economy, a war market, war for tests, war for masks, for medical equipment, and some countries are stronger in this than others. And for policy making, it's a unique experience of policy making in extreme uncertainty, not knowing how long this is going to take. Now, linking this to circular economy, just like in the UK, circular economy is a strong policy paradigm at the moment, a couple of years already. It's difficult to directly link it, but I can observe some very special things happening. When everybody had to stay home, people started to clean up their houses, and the recycle stations in the municipalities completely got overloaded, so they closed down the places to bring back your recyclable stuff in many municipalities. Of course, with the medical activities, there's a massive use of single-use equipment, and there's a little talk about cleaning up and sterilizing masks and medical equipment, and to maybe work towards recyclable stuff in this sense as well. I hear signals from circular economy startups having problems. A lot of especially in this field, companies often started to work just recently, and they have problems in that sense as well. And for the circular economy policy, it's not so clear yet, but I could expect that there would be some delay in the implementation of recently announced policies. These are all negatives. There are some positives to mention, just echoing a bit what Pauline was saying, indeed, around solidarity and community support and increased sharing. We depend more on the people in our own neighborhoods, which might be a very good change. And there's some first reflection on maybe changing the old habits around consumerism, long-distance flying, and all these kind of polluting activities. So what would be the future impacts? Well, for the longer term, it's clear that we need to expect a severe economic crisis. A lot of the companies that have to close down for a couple of months, they cannot bear this. So there would be bankruptcies. And especially, it's interesting maybe to see, at least in the Netherlands, that the industries that are more higher in the ranking of human needs, so it's more about leisure and fun. Those sectors, they're closed down for a long time, and there the impacts would be bigger than maybe in the production sectors. Of course, it is, I also have this in my slides, the concept of resilience may revive here. How good are we to prevent or to deal with these kind of crises? And some questions come up here. It would be an interesting test which we can start investigating quite soon, whether companies that have a clear corporate sustainability strategy have the responsible front-runner firms, which we know, whether these are able to survive better than the ones that are old school. Another huge important issue is the difference in the impacts between higher income countries, middle income countries, and lower income countries. And for the last ones, I'm not sure whether we have sufficient data on what is actually happening in many of the low income countries at the moment. For a circular economy, you might maybe expect that the level of reuse and repairing and reselling products might increase, but maybe just because of necessity, because of the crisis. So it might actually lead to a positive impact, but not out of positive motivations in that sense. Another interesting thing is maybe to look at, we see in the Netherlands that in the public discourse, there are some first steps of a discourse on this. How should we deal with this? And I read in the slides, which I will share later, there are links to these websites. Mostly some consultancies are pushing now the debate about reinventing society after the corona crisis. But if you look at what they are saying, they are more or less echoing the advocacy that they already had. So they're reselling their main product or service office, which they already have. So it's very difficult at this stage already to say where we are heading. I see very quick governmental responses in the Netherlands, but everywhere, in fact, which may lead to a re-evaluation of the role of government. In Europe, we trust a lot on self-governance and collaborative programs with the industry, but maybe we should acknowledge that governments can actually have a stronger role, and that might also be applied to the slower crisis, like the general sustainable development crisis, which we are looking at. But I also see governments that are completely in denial or late response, or even governments that misuse the crisis for authoritarian regimes by banning out the role of parliament and press, and others might even use it as fuel for their polarization strategies, which is happening as we speak in various countries around the world, I would say. So key question maybe for our discussion would be indeed, do we see, or will it be a turning point maybe in globalization? There's fast spread of the corona crisis is, of course, very clearly linked to the traveling of people and goods and having our very globalized economy. So would it maybe lead to, again, re-emphasizing local production? First, maybe for medical equipment, but maybe also for other types of produce. Would it maybe strengthen the application of the precaution principle, which is not new in the field of environmental policy? It has been, well, the attention has gone a little bit away from it, and I've also in the last few years seen attacks on the precaution principle. So it might be get new attention with these experiences. Would it also apply to our issue of resource depletion? Behind this circular economy, of course, we're having this slow development towards depletion of very specific resources, which would be a slow pandemic, one might say. And my last point here is, at least in the Netherlands, the scientific experts are given a lot of credit at the moment, while they were losing their position in the last 2 decades, I would nearly say. So this would also be a major change. And this is my last slide. I see some first signs of a changing course to some extent in the Dutch governmental policy the last week, actually, and also you see it with some companies that there are efforts now to let us sustain this home working, at least partly, which might reduce mobility, and we could stop doing our infrastructure plans which are needed because of the traffic jams, but probably we can avoid the traffic jams, which was not a new message, but now maybe people will believe this. And even yesterday, the Dutch government announced that they will slow down the reopening of the Schiphol airport, which has always been a heated debate, but the government never took the side of slowing down this kind of developments. So this sounds very interesting. And a last point to mention maybe is that there's a public movement also the last 2 weeks talking about all the financial support to companies in this economic crisis time to not allow the large multinationals that in the past did not pay any tax in the Netherlands to also profit from these economic support systems, which is an interesting point, I would say. So far, my presentation.
Oh, thank you very much, Walter. Now we've run 3 presentations. We'll now take questions for them. My first question goes to Dr. Davis from the US. Initially, Italy was it was like a medal table, like a European League or World Cup, leading the table. Suddenly, US overtook the table. Now you have over 80,000 deaths. Do you think the US has failed the world in this direction, in that it was not prepared for the pandemic? Or was there anything that the US could have done differently, given in terms of resources, in terms of manpower, in terms of political will?
To me, it seems, I mean, we're seeing this in the news as well, that the US was really slow in responding and failed to grasp the seriousness of the situation until things had escalated beyond a point where they could be controlled. Often we hear here that one of the main challenges has been the ability to test enough people rapidly enough in order to be able to track the virus's spread and to be able to perform contact tracing. So to me, that's one of the main challenges that the US has faced, and it's something that we're still struggling with, being able to ramp up that capacity in order to help things return to some semblance of normal.
Thank you very much. We wish the US will lead in the sense by giving us the rest of the world direction in terms of developing vaccine, in terms of supporting other nations to quickly overcome this. My next question goes to Pauline. In your presentation, you seem to allude that society is changing, albeit slowly, given the pandemic. Do you think, given post-pandemic now or in this pandemic, do you think the social system in the UK will change, or how do you think it will be modified? You talk about stay at home. I know before now, as environmentalists, we normally advocate that people don't have to go to office 5 times a week to work. But they thought that is a joke. Why should you stay at home and work? But now we realize that that's an effective way. Do you think this can be a global practice that organizations like ILO or people should continue to advocate? And maybe science can now help us to design, what is the optimum time that each person needs to go out of the house to make the environment more friendly for the over 7 billion people on the earth?
Well, I think there will be a shift towards home working unless everyone is just so fed up by the time this is over that they have to get out. I have to say, I may be one of the few who is pining for my office. So I do regret that I can't be working there at the minute, but I've spoken to colleagues and relatives who are actually saying, yeah, this is good working at home. I have quite a short commute, but take my sister, for example, spends 3 hours a day on trains to get into an office in London and back. She's very happy working at home, so she's been far more productive than if she were going to the office and all the sort of, well, actually quite important social things that happen at work when you're chatting with your colleagues, but she hasn't got them at home. So she, from her company's point of view, they're getting more out of her than they would if she were at work. The company and others I've seen in the press are eyeing up the amount of real estate that they need. Why are they renting at enormous expense large office blocks in the City of London when they could have people working at home? So I think there will be changes put forward in that sense. It does raise questions, though, who's paying the electricity bill and the Wi-Fi bill and those sorts of things. It's putting responsibilities onto staff. I think that some jobs might disappear in the midst of this as well. Companies will have furloughed many, some, or in a few cases, all of their staff. When business picks up again, they might decide they don't need them all, or they'll lay some off, or they'll sort of watch and see how things go. So I can see companies coming through this, but perhaps much slimmed down versions of companies. And so far that we've seen young people, I think the statistic is those under 25 are 2.5 times more likely to have lost their jobs than the older generation, because they're disproportionately working in service industries, sort of entertainment, restaurants and so forth. And of course, those things are all shut at the moment. So changes will happen, but what I would personally be hoping is that we will return to something more resembling what we call normal and stop to think about what works and what doesn't work, rather than, I'd be a bit disappointed to get an email saying, well, we're not going to reopen campus. You're all doing well at home. Keep going. So hopefully there'll be nothing quite so dramatic. It's been a very interesting experiment, but my personal conclusion would be that we're missing a lot as well as potentially gaining a lot from some of the present arrangements.
Okay, thank you very much, Pauline, for the wonderful contribution there. I go quickly now to Walter. You're a professor of global supply chain. You mentioned that this pandemic has exposed the world, as it were, in terms of responding to uncertainties, in terms of supply, medical supplies, for instance. There's a joke in the part of Africa. One country was said to not to have a case of COVID-19. And when, I don't know whether it's a joke, actually, but I assume it's a joke. And when the president was asked, so why is your country, you don't have a pandemic? He said they don't have, because they don't have a test kit. So if you don't have a test to confirm a case, you can say you don't have it. So the moment you have, you are tested, then you have, that is positive or negative. Do you think, and even at the moment, over almost 5 months into this situation, there are some countries that still don't have sufficient test kits, ventilators, and things. I thought the world was more sophisticated, advanced medically until now. What do you think?
Well, what you're telling, the little joke you're referring to, is exactly the point that I made about the statistics. Also in the Netherlands, the statistic tells half of the story, but we can still check it with the overall statistics about the number of people dying each week, and that is where we can actually see how severe it is. But in many countries where measurements are not there, I could expect things are happening, but it's just not labeled or visible that it is happening to that extent. So yeah, and then about the international trade impacts. Of course, what happens now is a lot of close downs, partly also because of limited imports. So the international supply in international supply chains is partly disrupted, which leads to impacts further on in the supply chain or in the value chain in many very different places. I'm not sure how this is in all the different countries, but transport of produce is still allowed between the European borders and also from outside. It's the people transport which has been closed down, but still because of the close down of production in many countries, I expect in all types of value chains there's a disruption and a slowdown. At the other hand, consumption has also slowed down in many cases, partly because people are not able to go to the restaurants, go outside, and also because of the closing down of companies. So there will be a big dip in the global economy, and how it catches up is still a bit to be seen. And challenging would be to create or apply some of the fairness standards in all the policies that are now supporting the reopening of the economy. And that would be, strengthening some of the programs that are aiming for restructuring of the economy, more or less. So I hope these kind of things would also be sensed in, for example, the African countries. Of course, then you have to look to the specific type of trade relations which are there. There's a lot of produce going, actually also food products going from Africa to Europe. I'm not sure if that is disrupted. So this links again to issues about food security in African countries. And still, a lot is to be seen, and it's good to be critical and follow what is happening here, and hopefully give some signals which can help governments to direct it in the right direction. Although not everybody is in the same mindset for that. If you see the discussions about having a restart more in the direction of sustainable societies, there is a lot of support, and there may be a growth of support, but there will certainly also be oppositions. The ones that are hit by this won't like it, and often they are in better positions in the government, connecting to the government, than the ones that are pointing in the other direction.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'll turn over to the participant to take some of their questions. Again, kindly use the chat button to send your question to us. The first question I'll be taking is for Pauline, please. So you can also go through it in the chat button. It's from Biola Adeyemo. It's a question for Dr. Pauline. It says, is it economically sustainable for countries to continue this financial support post-COVID-19 and keep that? And then the second one says, is this support lifting the vulnerable out of poverty, especially in developing countries?
The first question, I'd say the answer to that is not in its present form. This money is being borrowed from, I'm not honestly sure where, but I'm pretty certain will need to be paid back, hopefully over a very long period of time. I think it does show or demonstrate maybe that the government can spend money, that it spent the last 10 years swearing was absolutely impossible to spend money on anything, and suddenly they found a apparently limitless amount. But I say they can't keep that up forever. A more sustainable model in the future, maybe if we decide, for example, that we're going to fly a lot less, and a lot of people are made redundant from the airline, the tourism industry. Perhaps as a society, we do owe them a reasonable income, but that would have to be raised, I would think, by taxes on the other sectors that continue to operate. So there will be quite some political discussion around how that might work, what a reasonable level of support for people would be. And to link that to sustainable development, if you consider things like fair trade products, organic, locally grown, quite often cost more than alternatives. If we want these people who've lost their jobs to the cause of climate change to live sustainably, they're going to need a lot more than the current minimum wage to make the kind of consumption choices that we might hope they would make. So there are some pretty strong decisions to be made there. A quite scary line I saw in one of our more lively and right-wing newspapers was saying that they hope that at least the foreign aid budget has been cut off while we're paying for the corona crisis. Well, I hope not, but I must admit I haven't checked whether that is the case or not, but there may be sort of compromises coming up in the future once we're over the immediate crisis and the politicians are trying to balance the books again. There may be unintended consequences, or perhaps I should say unexpected consequences, that are not so positive for sustainability, but we will have to wait and see how that pans out, I think.
Okay, thank you very much. The second question is from Desaline, and I think Desaline is from Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. He says, I'll just read directly. I need to hear from the presenter about the expected time of COVID-19 and other secondary disasters in respective countries. I think various presenters have done that. But what the follow-up, the rider is that how COVID-19 could influence climate change adaptation and mitigation efforts.
Okay. So, yeah, related to climate change adaptation and mitigation efforts, in the near term, I think we're seeing one of the unintended benefits of the COVID lockdown is that because of the decreased economic output, there's been an improvement in many places in terms of air quality and reduced greenhouse gas emissions. So that's an immediate unforeseen benefit, but for longer term sustained climate adaptation and mitigation efforts, I worry that countries where officials were already complacent or lukewarm about climate change efforts, that this stall in momentum could potentially halt some of those efforts. So I'm thinking of the US, for example, where during this pandemic, there have been a number of executive orders that have been issued to remove various environmental regulations that have been put in place by previous administrations. So I think there's danger of losing political momentum, but there's also great opportunities in a time like this where there are opportunities for transformation. So we're really at a crossroads, and I think it's going to be interesting, and I think it's a little bit uncertain how each country is going to respond and potentially leverage the situation in one direction or another.
Thank you very much. Just to add to that, as climate change experts too, I think all the issues around reduction in fossil fuel consumption is reducing greenhouse gases emission, and therefore is contributing in a way. And most of our models in the past perhaps doesn't envisage a pandemic like this. So I think it's high time we also calibrated our models to be able to capture things like this and therefore inform policy better. Thank you very much. Now switch over to the next panelist in person of Professor Jesse Otegbayo. Is the only survivor of COVID-19, I guess, in this meeting today. So it's a pleasure to have him. Professor Otegbayo, you are welcome, sir.
Good afternoon from Nigeria. Like the coordinator said, I have the privilege of being the only survivor of COVID-19 on this platform. So I'm talking from some form of hindsight. Well, I'm to speak about the effects of COVID-19 on the policies and lives of people in Nigeria and Africa. Nigeria has a population of over 200 million, and by point of fact, the largest country, and we dare say the economy in Africa. And therefore, whatever happens in Nigeria in terms of the after effect or the effect of COVID-19 infection has a kind of mirror image in other African countries, except in terms of the quantum of people that will be affected. Having a large number in our population will also presuppose that we are likely to have a large number of people to be affected. Otherwise, in Africa, and Nigeria inclusive, the effect of this COVID-19 infection is more or less the same. I still don't have the slides, but I have a chapter as also as a
yes, you can just run through. I'm trying to get it on, but it's not yet here. Yes.
Yeah, how COVID-19 is changing the lives of people and policies in Nigeria and Africa. Well, the first case of COVID-19 infection was reported on the 27th of February this year. And of course, since then, the number has been increasing. Thank you, I have it now.
Okay.
Then talking about the origin of the virus, I will have to skip some slides because of time. Of course, we know that COVID-19 is a zoonotic infection, mainly from bats, and we've had incidents of spread from animals to man, then from man to some clusters, then from clusters to community. And of course, because of international travels, it has spread all over the world to gain the status of a pandemic. We know it is an infection that is associated with high mortality, especially in some age groups, and the immunosuppressed. What we have is that by the 11th of May this year, there have been a number of cases in thousands that have been confirmed in Africa. In Nigeria, for now, we have an infection rate of about 18% of the population. This is still relatively low, but this may be misleading because we are not really testing enough. If nothing is done, it is expected that Nigeria will have a mortality rate of about 392,000. And you can see the figure that are projected for other African countries. However, some steps have been taken, so these are not likely to follow the statistics. In terms of how it has affected our lives and policies, I've decided to put them in about 7 or 8 areas of our life: our social life, economic, education, health, transportation, our religion, and culture. Well, in terms of socials, in Africa, we live more or less a communal life, except those who live in the cities. And of course, about 80% of African population live in rural areas, with only 20% or less living in urban area. And in the advent of the COVID-19, there has been a disruption and probably a fracture in social interaction because of the issues of preventive measures to be put in place, like social distancing. There has been some social distancing, which is also leading to emotional distancing. As a doctor, I've seen people who believe they are going crazy because they've not been able to go to work, they could not interact physically with people. And even in states, some borders of some states were closed so that you cannot move from one state to the other. This is affecting how people visit their relations and go about their normal businesses. In some northern states where we have what is called the almajiris, because of the economic impact and social activities, many have had to move down south, and this is causing disharmony because some of these states are sending them back because they believe some of them are already infected. In terms of security, some communities are being overwhelmed by bandits who come to attack in order to get some means of livelihood. The other major aspect that has affected us is our economy. Of course, the average, in terms of statistics, about 60% of the Nigerian population live below the poverty line. And of course, this is also a reflection of what obtains in other African countries, like I said. So with the COVID-19 and the affectation of economic activities, the stock market has witnessed a downfall, and even the value of the naira has gone down so very much. And therefore, the value of the dollar to the naira, which is what we use to measure the strength of our currency, has really gone down from about 360 naira to a dollar, now to about 500 naira to a dollar. And all this effect, it has a multiplier effect on the economy. The lockdown, which has been imposed in some states, either full or partial, has prevented people from engaging in meaningful economic activities, and this reduces their income, and especially the daily paid workers, the small and medium scale enterprises. This has led to poverty, this has led to hunger, and that is generating some other forms of crimes in the country. In the central bank, in a positive approach to mitigate this, has issued directives for their branches to give some low interest loans. In fact, I received a document from a bank 2 days ago that the central bank has set aside about 100 billion to assist some organizations, including the health industry, to put in place measures that will mitigate the effect of COVID-19. People have not been able to pay their loans, even those who have rented apartments because they are not working. Some employers have sacked their workers, some have reduced their take-home pay, and some have actually not paid at all. And you know the likely effect this will generate. In the education sector, which is also badly hit, all the schools have had to close down. Most of our teaching and learning in Africa is face-to-face, so to say. And therefore, many schools have closed down. In fact, all schools have closed down, and this is affecting our educational system. However, it has brought a positive side in the sense that some institutions, especially tertiary, are now using e-platforms, using Zoom or e-learning and all that, which is a kind of thing that has really not been practiced very well. Some major examinations, like entry examinations into universities and exit examination at secondary school levels, have had to be postponed or not completed. So the students who ought to have applied to universities to continue their education have not been able to do that. And this is a kind of setback. And of course, children are very interactive in their social activities. All this is making life a bit difficult and intolerable for them. One major area that has also been affected is the health sector. I happen to lead a teaching hospital in Nigeria, and I know the impact because of the cut in the budget in the wake of the COVID-19, because the Nigerian budget has been cut by 40%, and this was not enough before. In the African Union in year 2005, mandated all countries to be spending about 15% of their GDP on health. This has not been in Nigeria. For instance, the year 2020 budget for health was 4.14%, which is of the GDP, which is a far cry from the 15%. And of course, now seeing that this same budget is being cut by 40%, will have adverse effect on what we can do. However, a number of well-to-do individuals and organizations are giving relief packages to hospitals by giving donations for what are needed to combat COVID-19. The after effect of this is that if the hospitals are better equipped during this COVID-19, by the time COVID-19 goes, we will be able to use some of this equipment to take care of our regular patients. In terms of transportation, which is also linked to the economy, airlines have stopped, railway have stopped, even the ground transport has been reduced maximally because people cannot, or drivers or commuters are reduced in the numbers that can use the vehicles. Like in some places, they are allowed to only carry 50% of the normal passengers in states where there's no total lockdown. Interstate travels by airlines and all over the country. No flight now except maybe for government officials who have one thing or the other to do. And in terms of religion, we know by WHO definition, health is also part of health system is religious or spiritual sanity. And when people are unable to go to churches or mosques, this also affects their health, because in Africa, a lot of premium is paid on religious activities. People see it either as social gathering and where they get their source of stability. So when this is not there, there's tendency that some people will break down either mentally and all that. And of course, all these religious institutions also are unable to take the kind of, the economic aspect of it is also down. People pay offerings, they pay tithes to these churches to run activities, to pay their staff. All this cannot be done to the maximum. But some churches now have a platform for online payment. Now, what can we do in the wake of all this in order to remedy all the anomalies that have been brought about? We have a center that looks like the CDC in the US, the National Center for Disease Control, Nigerian Center for Disease Control, I think named after the Center for Disease Control in the US. They are helping a lot of hospitals and laboratories to develop the capacity to test for COVID-19. I know of some centers like in Lagos, they have given them a 100-bed hospital to take care of infectious diseases which are adequately equipped. And by the time the COVID-19 goes, all this will be reverted to take care of our regular patients. And of course, that's once and for all sensitized us to the fact that we need to develop our health sector, which has been a bit shaky. And major teaching hospitals in the country will have to be remodeled and equipped to aid the fight against the virus and also for the health of the people. Many private laboratories are also being encouraged to participate in the healthcare delivery system. A total lockdown is being enforced to stem the tide of the spread of the infection. However, this is not sustainable because the economy will collapse totally. With all this put in place, I believe the policies and the affectation of lives of individuals in Nigeria will go for the better. I thank you for your audience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof, for the wonderful presentation. Next, I'll ask a question because Prof will be leaving for another meeting. Prof, you seem to allude to the fact that the budgetary allocation to health sector in Nigeria, maybe that represents Africa, is grossly inadequate. But in view of the COVID-19, we have seen a lot of support for the health sector, vis-a-vis donations and fundraising issues. Do you think that will go away in the nearest future after COVID? That is the first thing. The second question is that given the importance of the health sector and the need to for reawakening, as it were, and in terms of prevention and developing cure and providing vaccination or developing vaccine. I see recently that there's a lot of incoherence or disorganization in the way, especially Nigeria is handling the case. Yesterday, I read that FRAME, the Forestry Research Institute of Nigeria, developed a cure. And also, I read this morning that Abu has developed a cure. And all of this seems to be outside the Ministry of Health, which you represent. Do you think that scientists and researchers and the ministry is not doing enough?
Available by some other institutional order from the Ministry of Health. This is a welcome development. Solution could come from anywhere, and they say necessity is the mother of invention. There are some institutes or research institutes who have been dormant or not really doing much. But when there's a challenge like this COVID-19 has done to every country now, we now start looking for a way of mitigating whatever health problem we have. And I think it's one of the positive things that this pandemic has brought to us. There's a reawakening, there's a renewed awareness that we need to be on our toes and we shouldn't wait till there's a disaster before we start looking for solutions. For those who said they found the cure, this is my own view, all these cures have to be subjected to clinical trials, and it has to be scientifically proven, reproducible in other places. You don't just find something and say it's a cure and everybody embraces it immediately. Of course, the Ministry of Health has a unit for traditional medicine, and I believe this will be tested by them. We also have a unit that looks like the FDA of the United States. We call it NAFDAC. They will also look at it and certify that it's fit for consumption. It has no deleterious side effect, and whether truly it can cure the COVID-19 infection. Because a drug may be able to decimate a virus or a bacterium, but it may precipitate further damage in the human organs. It may damage the kidney, the liver, and all that. So in vitro test that suggests therapeutic effect does not mean in vivo cure for whatever infection. So those are my comments. Thank you.
I have several questions here, but because we have to go now, I'll just try to take one of them. I said to Professor Otebe, is there any legal sustainable framework to support indigenous research on the treatment of infectious diseases?
The answer is yes. In fact, there's a letter from the Honorable Minister of Health to the Director General, Professor Adeyeye of NAFDAC, to look into some of our traditional medicines, our herbal preparations that may have antiviral effects or may improve the condition of those that have COVID-19 infection. So that directive has been given by the Honorable Minister of Health. And institutes like NIMA, the Nigeria Institute for Medical Research in Lagos, is also doing a lot of trials on some of these traditional medicines. And it takes a little time because before you can complete a clinical trial, it's a matter of weeks and not just something you do within a couple of days or a couple of weeks.
One more thing, one of the recommendations from maybe taken from other places in the world is the case of lockdown. Nigeria lockdown, in at least 2 states, including and the Federal Capital Territory, and recently eased the lockdown. But since the easing of the lockdown, we seem to be experiencing high incidences of cases of people who are testing positive to the virus. Do you envisage another round of lockdown, or what do you think the country or the other countries can do after locking down and easing, and they experience a surge in cases?
Well, looking at the economic implications of this lockdown and increasing poverty, increasing crime rate, falling value of our currency, and so many other ills that have been associated with it, domestic violence and all that, it is not something that is sustainable to have a continuous and protracted lockdown. However, it has to be done with in measures. It is not all over the country that this lockdown is in place. Some states are just locking their borders or closing their borders and also introducing curfews, like dusk to dawn curfews to reduce human interaction. And let me say this scientifically, whenever there's a new infection like this COVID-19 introduced into any community, there's a need for the community to interact with the agent, with the virus, so that they develop natural immunity to it. Because no matter how much you lock down the infection, it cannot just disappear like that. There's no way we will not interact. It's not possible to have 100% lack of interaction. When we interact with the virus, the immunity to that virus will start to develop over time in the community. And by the time about 80% of the population or the community have had immunity, then the effect of the virus will be attenuated and not many people will be affected. But for us to just be like what they call nude mice that has not been exposed to that infection. The disease or the infection is usually very, very severe in those who don't have antibodies or protective antibodies against it. But this should not be so massive. That is why I support the way it is being done. It's graded. You start with curfew. You start with lockdown. Then you ease it a little, and you watch the numbers. You watch the statistics. At a point, if you think it's getting out of hand, you introduce the lockdown again. But with time, people will be exposed a little, and herd immunity will develop, and subsequently, the virus will just be affecting just a few people. The virus is not going to go away. All the coronaviruses that have been experienced before, they are still in circulation. They are still with us. It's just that they are not spreading at the scale that this new coronavirus is spreading. And that is just because we lack immunity to it. So with time, we will develop immunity, and the spread will be reduced, and the severity of the infection will reduce. Till today, we've had H influenza, the flu that killed so many in ages past. Those viruses are still with us. People still have occasional flu. It's just that the severity is less and the spread is attenuated. So the same thing will happen for this COVID-19. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe the last one before you leave, Prof, is that as a survivor, I can't overemphasize that. What helps you to recover? Maybe can you share some experiences with people on how to boost their immunity? One. Then another thing I read this morning is that, just which you have also alluded to, is that the virus is not living soon. It may extend even up to 2021. So what do we need to be doing since we know that it's already here with us?
Well, thank you very much. As per what helped me, one, I did not have any underlying medical condition. Those who have underlying medical conditions like heart disease, kidney disease, liver disease, cancer, HIV, or maybe they're on drugs that lower immunity like steroids, tend to do worse when they are hit with such infection. I didn't have all that. Number two, my immunity was not bad, or would I say it was good, and it's still good, because your immunity is as good as well as you are nourished. A well-nourished person is likely to have a better immunity than if you have two children, one that has kwashiorkor, the other one is a healthy child from a high class. If you introduce the same amount of malaria parasites into them, the way the malnourished child will go down with malaria will be much, much worse than the one that is well-nourished. And I think I'm a bit well-nourished. And of course, there are some vitamin supplements that may boost immunity and also reduce the inflammatory response that the body may have to the virus or any disease-causing agent. Such vitamins which I took are like high-dose vitamin C, vitamin D, because they don't kill the virus, they don't have antiviral properties, but the virus causes tissue damage by releasing some substances called cytokines that cause tissue damage. So these vitamins tend to suppress the inflammatory response and therefore the disease. And of course, I was taking a lot of fluids, having exercises. And of course, my spirit was also very high, because if you are emotionally down, your immunity is also going to go down. I was in high spirits, and I took all these things of course, as per other drugs, I would not want to declare that, because I just took the drugs that my doctors asked me to take. And I wouldn't want people to go away with the fact that once they have this, they should go for this drug. They should rather see their healthcare worker and go according to their instructions. Thank you. Sorry, yeah, Prof, I think there are two questions. Sorry.
Yes, there are two. No, those are the two questions.
So you said since the virus will not go.
It will not go. Yes, in 2021.
Yes, we are still to continue all these preventive measures like washing of hands, using of face masks, using hand sanitizers, and of course the research that is going on to look for effective vaccine, and also the traditional medication that is being worked on. If all these are put in place, we can still find a solution solution to this problem of COVID-19. In all, the greatest weapon we have is prevention. So all the preventive measures that have been outlined globally by the WHO and our own NCDC, with that, we'll be able to decimate the virus or reduce its impact. Thank you.
I just want to use this opportunity to thank Professor Jesse Otegbayo for the wonderful presentation and for sharing his experience as a survivor of the dreaded coronavirus infection disease. We'll go back to the chat buttons and we'll take more questions for our earlier presenter. The question, rather than using the chat, you can just indicate. Let me introduce a member of the board again. It's Deseline from Addis Ababa. Would you like to ask a question to any of the panelists, please?
Yeah, thank you very much for your nice presentation. I've already just posted my question. Is there any lessons that we can learn from the COVID-19 response to just manage that is both pre and post-disaster risk management for man-made natural hazards? This is to all presenters.
Yes.
I think there are lessons that can be learned, maybe to pay attention to what the possibilities are. There are things that won't really be clear, I think, for some time, but there are sort of, let's say, at least rumours at the minute that governments have been warned of such a pandemic coming in recent years. And if you've watched the movie Contagion that was made in 2011, you'd feel like everyone should have had a pretty good idea of what was coming. They were talking about social distancing and arm numbers and personal protective equipment, all the kinds of things that are being discussed now. So I feel like governments could have done better. Maybe we're a bit complacent. Again, it's partly just rumours, but there's certainly stories that we were shipping PPE abroad in February. And on the one hand, I think, well, it's good that maybe we were helping another country, but on the other hand, a slightly crazy thing to do when we were clearly about to need lots of it. So, yes, definitely things could be done better, but of course governments do have many priorities that they are juggling. And I would hesitate to expect that they would necessarily do much better in the future. Partly, well, I have no idea what other things they may have been warned about that they might also need to be making preparations for. So, you know, I hesitate to accuse them of being careless without a full understanding of their situation. But I think definitely paying more attention to the warnings in the future would be a good start.
Kai, you want to respond to that too?
Sure, yeah, I can add a little bit from a food security perspective. So I think what this highlights is that it highlights the importance of strategic reserves in terms of moderating fluctuations in food supply. So I think that countries are going to realize that maintaining strategic reserves is important, and it potentially necessitates expanding. I also think it highlights the importance of different food security programs for a lot of vulnerable people in our communities. For instance, in the US, there are a lot of people who rely on school meals to meet their nutritional needs daily, and those school meals are still being provided even under lockdown. So those types of programs that support the vulnerable parts of our population require at least maintenance, but I would argue expansion in a post-COVID world.
What's up, please?
Okay, yeah. Well, I try to illustrate some examples of an emerging discourse on this indeed. One of the things is the concept of resilience, which is quite well known in the sustainability science, could get more attention, and the things that are mentioned by the others are examples of that. like having larger stocks of reserve to actually be able to anticipate shocks. And interestingly, in various sectors, there's quite some preventative stocks, like in our Rotterdam harbor, we have a huge storage of oil, which can actually help the country for half a year or something. Actually, it's now running over because the consumption of oil has gone down. But interestingly enough, for other sectors, like the medical sector, this is hardly done. And we are facing issues around mouth protection, etc., because we don't have this industry in our country at all anymore. And the country has a task force to try to get it, but we cannot, well, we have quite some difficulties actually to buy on the international market this kind of prevention measures because of the war type of market there. So setting up industries of vital, well, I was talking about indeed having security storage to be able to deal with these kind of shocks. That is one of the type of responses, apart from maybe reinforcing a more sustainable economy. That's part of the discourse as well.
Question for Walter. This person, Daniel, was asking, what is your stand on globalization and circular economy? Won't circular economy affect the rate of globalization, judging by the recent move by China and India, exports restriction on drugs and certain raw materials for production?
Okay. Well, that's a very broad question.
Very broad, yeah.
And well, we actually, some of us are in an international research project, the Creston project, where we are looking at the implementation of circular economy from diverse angles. And one of the angles that we're looking at is that although we, the crucial principle of circular economy is to keep materials in a circular flow within the economy, it raises questions about scale. So this calls for a move from the global supply chains to actually smaller scale, smaller geography, circular economies, value chains. But in reality, of course, we see that in a lot of cases, products are imported, produced somewhere far away, and then the recycling would be somewhere in a regional context or in a national context. And what partly happens is that a part of the materials that are collected for recycling are still exported again in the international context, like the export of plastics from Europe to China, to Africa, exports of electronic waste. And part of that is actually under the regimes of national extended producer responsibility programs. That's actually one of the topics that we were to talk about in Ibadan today in the originally planned workshop.
Yeah.
So here we have major challenges actually. Partly the trade of second-hand products from Africa, from Europe or the US into Africa and other areas may still produce jobs and economic opportunities. But in many cases, or maybe even most cases, this is not very well controlled, and the pollution ends up remotely in uncontrolled conditions. So this is actually a point of attention in our research project as well. So we're talking and thinking about developing extended producer responsibility systems in the African context, where the producers in Europe, which are actually paying for the proper recycling of post-consumer goods, should also take responsibility of the proper dealing with exported second-hand produce into African countries. Well, we would have had a meeting on this in Ibadan at this moment, but we changed this into an online e-Delphi, which we hope to launch somewhere next month. So if people participating in this meeting are working in this area, please let us know. We could invite you as well. But here the challenge would be to have a debate about how, as far as this still happens, exports of secondary or second-hand products into African countries can be organized in a better way with the same quality standards as recycling occurs in Europe, and where the system of this is financed by the original producers, like is also done in Europe. So we want to set some steps on this, design how this can be organized, have debates with stakeholders in African countries, and together with the Image organization, we plan to have some debates at hopefully future also physical meetings again later in Ibadan or other places. And by collecting sufficient evidence on the current situation and showing a way out into new policy programs in this direction, we can actually start give inputs to a political process both in the African countries, and we can feed this back into the European Commission, who is still eager. I didn't mention that in my speech, but it was in the slides. Frans Timmermans, the co-chair of the European Commission, he actually announced also just a couple of weeks ago that the climate change agenda, including the circular economy agenda, should not be postponed or delayed as caused by the corona crisis, but should be actually implemented with the same force or even maybe with stronger force. So there must be ways in to feed in this discussion on that level as well.
Okay, thank you very much. I just want to know your closing thoughts on the circularity and COVID-19. Where do we go, or where do we find ourselves in the next 6 months or thereabout? What are the key issues for research and for policy?
Okay. Yeah, so thanks again. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I thought there was a broad set of topics that we attempted to cover, and I think with all of the inputs from the different speakers, we tried to do a pretty good job of that. But moving forward, I think from an international perspective, I would recommend that countries continue to observe what's successful in the places that are already more advanced in terms of the COVID pandemic progressing, and that countries attempt to respond quickly and be proactive in doing so. And that has a lot of implications for a circular economy as well. So those are my brief thoughts, and thank you again.
Thank you. Pauline?
Yes, I would also like to say thank you very much, Wale, and to everyone who's been taking part. It's been really interesting. I think I'd be a brave person who looks forward 6 months after the experience of the last couple of months, whereas part of my job teaching in the geography department, writing advice to colleagues, and the advice would change 3 times before I'd finished the first email. So some space to sit back and think and to observe and wait for slightly more accurate data would be good. The policy makers, of course, have to keep it up on the hoof as they go along. One thing that I've heard that is encouraging, so plans to share a vaccine as soon as possible. By exactly what order of priorities, I'm not sure, but hopefully that when it emerges will be made available at cost, price or less. So that would be encouraging. it does seem like every country is sort of working for itself at the minute. And one of the issues with preparing for this pandemic has been that it, well, by definition, is global. So everyone's after the same supply of stuff wherever it happens to be made. So I doubt that we can kind of stop globalization. And in some ways, because it does have benefits, I think maybe understanding better what is going on and what the connections are between different places would be a good step forward. And then if we could move to a place where we try to work things out in the best interests of people rather than in the best interests of companies, which what kind of tends to happen at the minute, I think that would be a much better place to be in, but that's rather a long way from where we are at the minute. So keep an eye out for what happens in the near future and try to campaign for something better in the longer term is the best I can say for now.
Thank you very much. Walter, over to you, please.
Yeah, I fully agree with Pauline that it's far too early maybe to make any conclusions because we are in the middle or maybe just in the first part of the movie, which is unrolling. Looking as a scientist, it seems it's an awkward situation where we seem to be in a massive global experiment where around 200 countries respond each in their own ways, and we get twisted and biased data, which makes it very difficult to really make good comparisons. There are some efforts by Oxford University and in the US, this Hopkins University to actually have all these data together, but we know that the data is twisted and incomplete. But it would be essential to really have a objective, as far as that is possible, objective comparison indeed of the various strategies that have been applied and to look which works best. But partly this is a health professionals discourse as well, but it goes much further, of course, because the whole society is affected. Then, what will happen is in the same amount of diversity responses to the economic crisis, which will occur everywhere and which will have probably a global effect apart from what is happening in the individual countries. We are all connected, and we already had some examples of things happening in one country then leading to results in other countries. I was in contact in the last weeks with Lauren Rosenberg, former PhD of me, who was working in Burundi in the coffee industry. And even before there was one affected person in Burundi, the American funders of their coffee farm were stepping back because of what was happening in the US, because they canceled all the orders for this project over there, which has a huge impact in this this almost poorest country in the world. So this connectedness is very big. And I think the challenge is to think of response and recovery strategies, which take care in a way that the ones that are the most affected and the most vulnerable are supported first, instead of what we see, I think, in many cases, that the big and then called vital industries are supported first rather than the ones that are at the bottom of the pyramid.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. It's about time to close here. But if you still have more questions that you want our speakers to respond to, we are free to contact us or follow us on Twitter. I will try to address all the questions and we pass them on to the presenter. Once again, thank you very much. Bye-bye for now.